Mr. Speaker, there are numerous concerns over the Alberta Draft Caribou Range Plan that this government recently submitted to the federal government. One such concern that is being raised is over the idea of the possibility of designating protected areas that would limit forestry across Alberta. Minister, this caribou plan could cost the Northwest region $90 billion of potential resource revenue. As such, the minister says she's heard from Albertans, so I guess my question is, has her ministry completed any economic analysis on what the possible closure would cost the Alberta economy in northern areas that may be closed to forestry activities? And does that cost include any compensation to companies that harvest in those areas?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And of course, forestry companies and energy companies and communities understand full well the risk of an emergency order. And certainly Southern Albertans, which the Honourable Member also is an MLA, understands the negative consequences of an emergency order like we saw with the sage-grouse, Mr. Speaker. And we want to avoid that situation, and so do the forestry companies, and so do the oil and gas companies. And so that's why we are ensuring that we are doing a full socioeconomic analysis, but we're also asking the federal government to really come to the table in terms of their investments, Mr. Speaker. And until we see that, we have suspended some aspects.
Honourable Minister, first supplemental.
That answer doesn't provide any certainty to the forestry industry, Mr. Speaker. Given that the caribou herd that once lived in Banff National Park was wiped out in a freak avalanche decades ago, and given that this government worked with the federal government to recently reintroduce bison, a species that has been absent from the park for a century, Minister, why was there no mention of a plan to repopulate the Banff caribou herd, a herd that did exist in a national park area with no development or industrial projects?
The Minister of Environment and Parks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the reason why the province of Alberta has not engaged in caribou recovery in a national park is because the Constitution is a thing. So that's the answer to that question. The fact of the matter is that an emergency order is not in Albertans' best interest, but neither too is a plan that doesn't accurately balance the need to make sure that we have economic growth and jobs, and that is why we have asked for a more fulsome socioeconomic analysis and pause some aspects of range planning pending that analysis, Mr. Speaker.
Second supplemental.
So I wonder why this government's picking winners and losers with wildlife. Mr. Speaker, given that several herds have their ranges primarily in protected areas, for example, the La Pêche herd has substantial areas within the parks already, and given that the majority of the Caribou Mountain herd's territory is already in protected areas, Minister, exactly how are more protected lands going to help increase caribou herd in population in Alberta when the herd in Banff National Park was already so vulnerable that an avalanche was able to wipe that herd out? Excuse my stumbling.
Honourable Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the risk of emergency order is real, and that is why, for example, companies like Ancana and Jupiter Resources and others have been working really productively with us in that Little Smoky and Alapashe areas. Mr. Speaker, there is a tremendous amount of economic potential in the tight oil and liquid rich gas plays in that area, but there are also some really good ideas around road sharing and infrastructure sharing and so on, and companies have really stepped up to the plate on that, and we will continue to work productively with them on those suggestions. They know the risk of an emergency order. It's really too bad that other members of this House